Hello and welcome to this ethical hacking workshop. If you want to learn more about hacking and using artificial intelligence and cybersecurity, then you're in the right place. We have a pretty packed 60 minutes today, so let's jump right in and meet the Infosec team. My name is Jeff Peters, and I'm the Director of Brand and Content Marketing here at Infosec Institute. For those who aren't familiar with Infosec, we've been training cybersecurity professionals for more than 20 years. And Keatron Evans, who is going to be our guide today, has taught actually some of our very first ethical hacking boot camps going back 20 years ago. So I really cannot think of a better person than Keatron for today's topic, as he's an expert instructor, cybersecurity practitioner, and thought leader, and he's now the VP of Portfolio Product and AI Strategy here at Infosec. I won't read off all of his credentials, but two to highlight is that he is the author of Chained Exploits, Advanced Hacking Attacks from Start to Finish, and he's also an AWS certified generative AI subject matter expert. So the bulk of this workshop is going to be the hacking and AI walkthrough from Keatron, but we will have a couple minutes before we kick that off to explain what you need to get the most out of this experience. And then at the end, we'll share some additional ethical hacking and AI training options with everybody. So why are we doing this ethical hacking workshop? Well, as I mentioned, we've been teaching ethical hacking for more than 20 years here at Infosec, and our 5-day ethical hacking bootcamp remains one of our most popular courses that we offer. The goal today is really to give everyone on the call the opportunity to learn and get some of that hands-on experience carrying out some of those hacking concepts from that 5-day bootcamp, as well as learn some of the new AI techniques that we added to the course. Of course, we're going to do that all in just 60 minutes. So there is a free lab environment that we'll show you in a moment. And to access that, you will need to create a free Infosec Skills account. Here are the steps for accessing the lab environment. There is that link that we shared. Once you click that, you either have to log in Infosec Skills or take 60 seconds to create your free Infosec Skills account. Once you're logged in, if you're not automatically redirected to that lab, just click the link again, and that should take you right there. If you're watching this on demand, there is a support button in the lower right corner of Infosec Skills. So just click that question mark and you'll be able to get open a support ticket there. So with that, I will hand it over to Keatron and let's get this started.
All right. Thank you very much, Jeff. So I kind of want to set the tone here. Like we're gonna go through the process here pretty slowly, like in the beginning, and then we'll eventually go back and go through it faster. So for those of you that are having trouble like getting into the lab or you haven't set up an account yet, don't worry about that because we are going to, like I said, this is to be recorded. So you can go back at any time, watch the recording and go step by step through the lab at your own pace, right? As you watch me do it, you can kind of pause and all that. Because what we're going to do with this is we're going to essentially record everything that we're doing here and make this recording and the lab environment itself a skills learning path. So that way, anybody at any time can go in and go through it, get the full experience of this webinar, plus you get to walk through it, right? So there's a lot of different reasons that, you know, we're doing it this way. But so think of it as you're going to be able to participate live in this experience. And we're doing it in a way that you can go back and participate at your own pace and even share it with others. And that's kind of the goal of it. So what I'm going to do is share my screen here and just kind of go into the lab environment. And we're going to approach this like in two ways, right? So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go through it. I'm going to have you to take your hands off the keyboard. I'm going to spend 5 minutes going through this hack as I would do it myself as an expert pen tester, right? And then we're going to go back and I'm going to go through it all again very slowly so that you can follow along. And we're going to use AI prompting to tell you how to do it, assuming you hadn't just watched me do it. And even if you just watch me do it, some of this stuff, like you can't just watch somebody do it one time and then you immediately get it, right? Because there's too many steps involved. There's a lot of micro pieces to it and that type thing. So again, I'm going to walk you through what the whole hack looks like, what the exploit looks like, and then we'll go through it again together where essentially we will use prompting to take us through it as if we had no idea how to do any of it. All right. So the first part is once the environment comes up, there is essentially two virtual machines. And let me just resize this here. So you can resize your environment by hitting these four-way arrows at the top. This shrinks it. And when it's shrunken, you can hit it again to expand them out to make it bigger. Over to the right, this is just where you go and access your resources. So for example, if I were to come over here and hit on resources, I can see the two virtual machines that make up this environment. There's a Windows one, there's a Kali Linux one, okay? Now, again, the purpose of this, what this seminar or webinar is to serve a few things. One of those is to show you what a basic discovery, enumeration, exploitation would actually look like. And then the second part of that is to show you how you can aid yourself and shorten your learning curve on learning how to do this stuff using smart AI prompting, right? Those are the two primary goals of what this is. Now, for those of you that are beginners or new to hacking or pen testing, this is going to suit you fine because the AI aided guiding and prompting is what's going to get you over that hump a lot faster than we've ever been able to do that before. For those of you that are already SMEs in pen testing, you're going to get some value out of this as well with some of the prompting that we're going to do. But more importantly, in the actual 5-day bootcamp, we go much, much deeper into it. We get into writing scripts to automate this using LangChain and RAG and other things to allow you to go out and get more up-to-date information for whatever language models or whatever types of foundation models you're using. We'll also get deep into customizing some of those models and doing all kinds of other stuff. Again, like I said, using LangChain to string together like hundreds of different prompts to get to the point that maybe you can automate an entire pen test with just prompting, right? That is the value of taking what we do here and bleeding that over into the full 5-day bootcamp, because that bootcamp, our ethical hacking bootcamp, has had a fundamental shift to where a lot of emphasis and focus is put on integrating AI with those techniques. And that, to me, is part of the biggest value. So let me jump right in and just follow instructions here. I'm going to log into the Kali VM using the credentials here. It's important that you don't try to follow me. Don't try to do it with me this first run, because I'm not going to go at a speed that's conducive for a beginner to follow me. I'm going at the speed to demonstrate it, so you need to just watch for this first run. And then I promise you, after I go through it, we'll go back through it together and add prompting to it so that you can do it with me, for those of you that have been able to get in. So the first thing I'm going to do, and again, I'm approaching this as I would do it, I'm going to log into my Kali. I want to elevate to a higher privilege so that I can do privilege types of scans and things like that. Somebody said, how did you elevate to root without entering the root password? So, all right, I mean, there's even some potential hacking right there. So just do man sudo and then search for -s. That's a homework assignment, and figure out what that -s flag does. But essentially, we're able to get to root with that flag and entering the current password because of how we've got the permission set up on this machine. And this is a common security misconfiguration, by the way. So that's something you could look for in a pen test. So now that I'm in here, the first thing I'm going to do is like, okay, let's examine my environment. So I'm just going to look and see, okay, my IP is 192.168.1.100. That means there may be other things at that point or on that network. So let me just explore that network. So I'm just executing a simple ping discovery scan. It's sending out a ping or, in this case, a ping and ARP to every IP in that range. So 254 IPs, we just checked to see if they're up. We see we got a response from .1, from .10, and .100. So I know I'm .100. That means there's a .1, which is probably a gateway or something. And then there's a .10, which is going to be our victim. So now I'm just going to expand on that. And say scan the .10 address and tell me the things that are running there. So I can see these things, and this is the default stated at VM. Now, to keep that thing from being vulnerable out of the gate, in other words, so when you start it, it's not extremely vulnerable, I'm gonna go over and I'm gonna install the software or just run the software that's vulnerable so that, and the reason I'm doing it this way is because I didn't want it to start up that way, right? I wanted to give us a chance to go and run it. That way it doesn't kind of come out the gate extremely vulnerable. So I'm going to run the software right on the desktop here. This is HFS 3 or 2.3. I'm going to right click and run it as administrator. All right, it's running on port 8080. So again, this is our victim, and this is a lab environment. So we're just pretending now we're playing administrator. We just went over and installed this software. This is why if you get a lot of flack from your security teams about not installing software without them knowing, the reason is because just that 2-second act of me double clicking and running that application, it's made this machine extremely vulnerable when it wasn't before, right? So this is why you have all of these policies and procedures and things like that. You know, you feel like you should be able to go out and get whatever software you need and install it. The reason is because of things of what you're going to see here. So if I go back now and play attacker, play that role, and I scan that exact same machine again, and remember, this is all recorded, so you'll see this again. We can see that now there's a port 8080 that shows up as open that was not open in the beginning. Okay. Now, the next thing is I'm going to use the same tool, Nmap, and have it to look at each service, like what is running on that port. And I'm going to essentially give it an SV flag here. And I'm just going to focus on port 8080 just to speed things up. Realistically, you'd want to check all those ports, but we're going to kind of get to the point here because I promise you we get through this in 5 minutes or so. So it tells me that there's a service running called HTTP file server HTTPD 2.3. Now, for those of you that have taken ethical hacking from me, you've seen this process before. You've seen me go through this. For those of you that haven't, this is a standard find the service, find the vulnerability, exploit it. So I'm going to go out to Google, armed with just that information, as soon as I can spell Google, and say, show me vulnerabilities for that software, HTTP file server 2. Right? And when we look at that, we see that there's all kinds of reports about this Rejetto web server. Okay. Now I'm going to take just that information. Okay. I can read up on this in exploit DB or whatever the case may be, but I'm going to go back to my attacker. And I'm just going to now use another part of Kali called searchsploit and just search for Rejetto. And it comes back and says, yeah, we have exploits for Rejetto. And specifically, if you look at the versioning here, you can see that 2.3b version that we have, that Nmap identified for us, is actually in the list of vulnerable versions of it, right? So now I would load up my exploit tool, in this case, Metasploit. And don't worry, the ChatGPT prompt is going to tell you how you would know to load this tool and how you would know to load that tool. Because we're going to ask it basic questions. You know, we're going to go through and ask it high-level questions and get it to give us detailed instructions like what you see me doing here. Now, again, this is all from the top of my head. These are things that I just know how to do. But the goal here and the value here is how do we get every one of you and anybody up to being able to do these same things in the shortest amount of time. And we believe that prompting and AI has made that possible. So now we know that we're looking for that Rejetto exploit. I could search in here And it tells me there it is, right? So now I'm going to use that exploit. Set my target. And then set where I want everything that I pilfer. If I'm able to break into that machine, everything that comes back to me, I have to tell my payload, which I'm shooting at that machine to try to exploit it. I have to put in that payload instructions on how to get back to me. Because we are talking about IP, we are talking about going across the network or the internet here. So you have to kind of give the machine that's your victim your return address. And that's where a lot of people get caught actually, is because they have to do that. And then we set the R port, which is the port on the victim that we're trying to exploit through. And we know that Rejetto is running on that port. Now that gets it all set. I launch the exploit. And you'll see that it's vulnerable. So we kind of checked it for vulnerability. So now we know it's vulnerable. All right. So now, just again, for safety's sake, I configured the Windows Defender over here to block this just in case somebody goes rogue with it. So now the last step, and again, I'm playing the administrator over here. I'm just going to go configure this so that it works. And one fun exercise for you to do is go and play with the different firewall and endpoint security settings that you have and see which levels you have to be at for certain exploits to work versus other exploits that work. All right, so let's go back and run that again. So we know it's vulnerable. It kind of came back and showed us that. Now we run it again. And we get a session. Now, to prove that we got it, we're going to do a few things. One is we're going to drop into a command shell by typing shell, and I'll give you a little preview. How would I know to do that? How would I know that? Okay, watch this. If I go to ChatGPT, free count, like I'm not even going to log in. I'm just going to say, I am, and it's important to prompt this way. I am testing my server for security. I'm in Metasploit with a Metepreter shell. How do I get from that to a regular Windows command shell or command line? Because even if you're a beginner to IT, you probably know what Windows command line is, right? So I'm asking it this question. And notice, because of how I phrase it, it didn't give me that warning of like, it didn't say, hey, you shouldn't be doing this. You know, this is a bad thing you're doing. Because I prefaced it with the fact that I'm testing my own system, blah, 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 it says, hey, all you got to do is type the command shell. So this is how I would know to type shell to get from Metepreter to a regular Windows command shell. And at this point, we're actually we've taken control of that victim machine. Now, we want to prove that to ourselves. So I'm going to CD back to the desktop first off. Okay. I'm going to write a file. Let's just prove that it doesn't exist. Let's just go to the victim. Let's go play victim. Check our desktop. There is no rogue text files, right? So there's nothing on the desktop that shouldn't be there. So I'm going to come over here and I'm going to say echo. And we're just going to say, we'll say for the holidays. And I'm going to write that to a file named, let's frame Camille, camille.txt. Okay. So now if we go back and play victim and check the desktop now, you will see that there is now a text file that was not there before, and it's named Camille.txt. If we open it, it actually says hack for the holidays. So now we know that we took control of that machine. We're able to write stuff to the desktop. But the problem is we still have limited permissions. So if I were to say, who am I, from the Windows command line, it tells me that I'm just this regular lab user. So I don't have elevated permissions. The next part of this would really be to elevate our privileges to a high enough level to be able to do whatever we wanted. And to do that, I would probably elevate myself to system, because in the world of Windows, system is the highest possible privilege you can ever have. Is the Windows equivalent to root. It's like the God privilege, and there is no privilege that outranks it. It's essentially running as the Windows kernel itself. So what I need to know then is, how do I get to that, right? So I Control C or Command C, if I'm on a Mac, go back to my Metepreter, and I'm just going to ask ChatGPT, how do I elevate from a regular user system? How would I elevate in Metepreter from regular user to system? It tells me simply type get system, and then there's some other methods that we can do, like priv. We could also find a process that's running a system and try to migrate into it. So there's a lot of different ways, but it starts us with the most basic, get system. Okay, so I'm gonna go back over and just do what it says. I'm gonna type get system, and it says you got system. So now if I drop into my shell again, and I say, who am I? I'm now, as soon as I can spell who am I am now system, and we've elevated to a highest possible privilege on that machine. It's game over. It's all over. We own it. We can even make it to where the admin can't do things that we don't want them to do at this point, right? So that's how we went quickly from getting into finding vulnerability to exploiting it, getting control. But so you watch me do that. How could we, through prompting, set someone up that's never done this before to do it? And this is where we get into, proper prompting and using AI right and all that. So let me get out here. And we'll act as if this never happened. All right. And we're going to start over. And this time, if you feel adventurous, you can walk through this with me. So in our Kali environment, the first thing we did, as a matter of fact, let's get out of the shell. Let me take you all the way from the beginning. So what do? We open a terminal in Kali. If you're very basic, you can even ask, let's just ask ChatGPT, how would I open a terminal in Kali? And it tells me, using the GUI, which we are, you can go to the application menu at the top left, navigate the system tools and accessories, click on the terminal emulator. Or we can right click on the desktop and say open terminal. So let's just look at both methods, going back to our machine here. So we could right click and say open terminal here, right? That's one way to get it. Or we could do what it said. We can go here to the application menu, go to terminal emulator. That's another way to do it. Or we could just click the little black terminal icon here. That's a third way to do it. Either way, we're at the terminal. The very next thing I did was I wanted to go from this privilege that we are here to root. So I'm going to ask ChatGPT, and you can ask it with me. how can I elevate to root on my Kali terminal using sudo? Or you can just say that, and we could start with that and let it take us down the rabbit hole. Because see, what I'm getting at here, everybody, I want you to understand what I'm getting at here is you can watch somebody like me do this, and as long as you're taking notes of the high level process, you can prompt your way to success. As long as you're able to follow the logic and note the high level steps that I'm taking, you can very easily prompt your way to getting all the in-between pieces done. And this is, to me, where the revolution in learning starts to happen, especially for beginners and even for experts. Now, it gives us several options here. It gives us sudo L, sudo su, su, bash, a couple of others. You can go and experiment with a few of these, and you go back and ask it some more questions. You'll eventually get to sudo s. So if we do L, and we enter our password, it gives us that. All right, if we do sudo -s, it works. All right. Now, if this is your first time being in the environment, when you do sudo -s, you still have to enter whatever your current password is, right? I didn't have to because I've already done it. Like I'm already in that context still. All right. So now that we're in the environment, we ask, how can I use Nmap to scan my current network to see what's there? So let's ask it. And make sure we start the prompt right. What devices are live? Now look at, you don't have to follow my prompts exactly. Okay, like I don't want anyone to get caught up in your screen or your prompts not matching my prompt results exactly. That doesn't matter, because as long as it's a large language model, right? So as long as you're asking around about the same questions, you're going to eventually get to the same answer. So I ask it this. And it says, okay, to do that, you will need to do an echo request or ping scan. The way that you do that within Nmap is you do an SN, which is a discovery scan, which sends an ICMP packet. It also sends an ARP in the beginning to see what ARP responses to get back before it does the ICMP echo request scan, right? So it tells us that, and it says, look, if your network is 192.168.1 anything, then you'll need to put that in with the .0/24, because it explains to you that when you do that /24, you're scanning from IPs 1 to 254. Essentially, it's just taking your subnet mask, which would be, in this case, 255.255.255.0, which means that's 1, 2, 3 255s, and each one of those octets represents 8 bits. So 3 times 8 is 24. So that's where the /24 comes from. As a matter of fact, you could write this, you could run the command and say -sn 192.168.1.1 through 254, and it would understand it. You could also do 192.168.1.0 space 255.255.255.0, and it would understand it, right? All of those methods work, but isn't /24 a lot shorter than typing all that out? So that's why it defaults to that. And not only is ChatGPT telling you the command, it's educating you on every flag, why that flag works. It's basically teaching it to you the way that I would if I were teaching you this. Now, again, I know a lot of you on here have taken classes from me in the past, and you know that like I'm very verbose when I cover this stuff, right? Like if you ask me, what's the command to do this? I'm going to tell you that command, but I'm also going to tell you why each piece of that command works and what it does. And this does the exact same thing, okay? So I do what it says. I'm going to take this command. Since my network is 192.168.1, if your network ended up being 10.10.10. something, then you would know you do 10.10.1.0 or 10.10.10.0/24, right? Whatever your IP range is, you would put that in as your target. So I go back and do that. Now, if you notice when I did this off the cuff, like off the top of my head in the beginning, I put the SN at the end, right? Like I did the Nmap, then the IP, then the SN. It doesn't matter. Nmap knows how to take the flags and it's going to execute it in a certain order anyways. Like it understands what you're trying to do. So I go ahead and run this command. And it shows me this 3 hosts up. Now, if you're following along and you're going step by step with me, you should get the same 3 because I built these, I built this environment so that the environment's identical. That way, everybody should be getting the same thing. Now, if you're falling behind again, or you're, still hung up on ChatGPT or something like that, again, all of this is recorded and you can go back through it at your own pace. Even if you haven't paid for Skills, you still have access to it because I put this lab in the free tier. So if you just got like the free 7-day account, you still are able to sit and go back through this at your own pace. All right, so we have our 3 targets. What we would do now is we know that this is ourselves because I would assume that most of you on here know how to check your own IP. But if you don't in Kali or Debian, it would just be IP, space A, for example. And you could see your Ethernet IP in this case is 192.168.1.100. So we know we don't want to target ourselves. We know that .1 is generally a gateway, and we may want to target that at some point. But we know that the machine that looks like it's not ours is the .10 address. All right. So now, if you're going through this with me, I'm going to go over to the victim so that you can set up your victim so that you can get everything to work. The first thing you want to do is you want to open a folder on the desktop that's HFS 2.3b, right-click the HFS application, and you want to run it as administrator. Once you have that running, okay, it's going to pop up an interface that looks like this. You want to change the port. By default, it's probably going to be port 80. If it is port 80, you just want to click port here and then just type 8080 into that and hit enter, hit OK, and it'll change it to 8080. If it defaulted to 8080, that means I already did that change for you and forgot that I did it, right? But either way, you want to make sure it shows your IP, which is .10 and 8080. And this again is on the Windows VM that you're setting up as the victim. Okay, second thing you want to do, you want to go and click on your Windows Defender icon by clicking this arrow at the bottom right, double clicking the Defender icon. You want to look for virus and threat protection. You want to go into that, and under virus and threat protection, go to manage settings, and you want to turn off. Now you want to turn this back on as soon as we're done with this exercise, but turn this off for now, because here's what happens. Once you get into Metepreter, what I found is if you use certain post-exploit payloads in Metepreter, because I know some of you are going to explore. So if you get in there and you start messing with registry and doing those things with the Metepreter post-exploit payloads, some of those will trigger this and it'll go off and it'll shut down your connection. So to just keep this demo going smooth in case somebody explores, make sure you turn this off. And then you can turn it back on when you're done. All right. And folks, that's it. That's the setup. once you've done those two things, started the HFS3 and went and turned off that real time, now you're ready to go back. And we're going to now dig into that 192.168.1.10 machine. So the next question is, how do we find what versions of what software is running on that machine using Nmap? All right, so let's do that prompt. How can I use Nmap to find what versions of software happens to be running on a given IP address? Now, if you want to get the exact command, you could say, we could say given the IP address, 192.168.1.10. Now, let me tell you something very important, maybe the most important thing I'm going to tell you today. Never, ever, ever, ever take any production, real home IPs, real work IPs, real work information, real home information. Never put that stuff into something like ChatGPT, ever. So the way you want to do that, if my real IP address is 192.168.1.10, I would change that to say something like 10.10.10.7, right? So I could ask it, given the IP is this. And you just have to know consciously, like whatever result it gives you back, you just need to change that IP to be whatever your actual target is. All right. So what it's showing us there is it's showing us, again, it's very verbose. It's not just showing us like what the command is, but it's showing us like what the flag is, which in this case would be SV. And it's telling us what that flag does. That's a version probe, which means it not only checks to see if the service is there, but it enumerates that service to see what that service says back to it so that it can identify what that service is and what version it is. Because things respond in a certain way, right? There's a popular TikTok trend going now where they'll have like a grandfather or a grandmother sitting in a chair with their back facing everybody else, and the grandkids come up behind them one by one and say, "Hey, grandpa," or "Hey, grandma," and the grandparent has to guess who it is by how they respond, and they're pretty good at it. Okay, we're doing like a slight version of that. Even though we can't be on that other machine and see what the service is, based on the hundreds of different ways each application responds given certain criteria, Nmap has a database to where it can look up in that database and get pretty accurate as to what it knows that service to be based on those responses. So when you give it the SV flag, you're simply asking it to do that. And ChatGPT basically tells you that, right? So it says we do the IP and the SV. Let's do that. We're taking that exactly right there. And our target is .10. All right, and then it shows us, this is how we get back to now. We can see that HTTP file server, blah, 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 2.3b version. All right, so now we could take that version of that software. We could even ask that question. We could say, are there known vulnerabilities for HTTP? And we're just taking exactly what we got in Nmap, version 2.3b. It says, yeah, there's several. it says there's a directory traversal vulnerability, which means you can get to directories that you shouldn't. But then there's a remote code execution vulnerability, which means you can execute code on that machine remotely. So out of those two, remote code execution probably sounds to be the most severe, right? Out of those two. And there are several others that it talks about. All right. So now I can say which specific, let's see if ChatGPT cuts us off here. Which specific exploits are available for me to test and see if my software is vulnerable to this. Let's see if it's smart enough to catch us and be like, nope, I'm not going to tell you that. Nope, it doesn't. It tells us. It's like, yep, there are several different exploits out there for it. So let's ask this. Is there a specific, now that we see CVEs, CVE associated with that, with the remote code vulnerability? Now it does tell us that this code, this may violate the usage, but it still goes right on to give us the information. So this is where it starts to talk about like the specific CVE, and it goes into the fact that it is Rejetto. So we could go search, right? Like we could take the CVE 3280. Let's go back to Metasploit or Kali. And you could also ask it how to search for exploits, and it would tell you search exploit. So we're going to search for CVE dash two dash, I think it's 3280. Might have messed it up. Hold on. Let's just, and this for the sake of time, let's shorten it. Let's just go off what we have so far. Let's do search exploit HTTP file server 2.3b. And it still takes us to that same Rejetto exploit, right? So that's, even if you didn't want to go and read on the CVE, just taking the file server version that identified, you could still get there, right? So now we could say, how do I load Metasploit from the Linux Kali command line? All right, I think I might have wore out my welcome here with Chat GPT not. All right, it's going to break on me. So let me stop sharing for just a second, and I'm going to log into my account. So I'm going to reshare now that I've gotten logged in. How can I start from my Windows, or excuse me, Kali terminal? All right, so again, it's all important how you phrase your question there. See, it's giving me like the processes. But I've already done all those things. So we're just going to go to MSF console. So we'll follow that instruction. All right. So now that we got Metasploit, we ask, how do we search for, we know the exploits got to do with Rejetto. So I would ask, how can I search for an exploit related to Rejetto? From the MSF console terminal. And then it just tells us to do search Rejetto, right? So let's do that. And then it actually goes on to tell us, like, once you find it, here's how you set up all the parameters that you need to use it, right? So even the part about setting up the exploit after you find it, it voluntarily tells me how to do that. Okay, so I'm just going to go over and do what it says. And I think we'll stop right at once we get in. All right, and then the rest of the ChatGPT instructions, I don't even need to go and do that. It tells me to, like, we got to set up all these things. So I got to use that exploit. Right, like I'm not cheating, like I'm literally following what it says. So it tells us you got to do all these things. It tells us you got to do that first, because you have to load the exploit. Then it says you have to do the required options. And to find out what they are, you have to do show options, right? So it's telling us, again, it's doing this as if I would, like, it's exactly how I would teach it, right? So if I load this exploit, it tells me all the other things I have to set, like the target and my own return address and the port. So once I set all those things, it even tells me, okay, now once you get all that set, you just need to type the command exploit to get on. And then it even gives us like a little rocket. Let me know if you need more details. So like I go ahead and type exploit. And this is where we get our Metepreter session. It'll take it like 5 to 10 seconds. So just let it do its thing. And then you can hit enter and you should get a Metepreter show. So what are we going to do after that? Let's do a little bit of a couple things while we got a few minutes. So first, let's do get system to elevate. Let's drop into a command shell. So we're just going to type shell, because we already saw earlier how ChatGPT told us how to do those things, right? Next, we're going to say, how do I create a user from the Windows command line? Because that's what we're going to do. We're going to add you to the experience here. How can I create a user from the Windows command line? Because I don't expect, even if you're a seasoned IT or cybersecurity person, I would be surprised if 90% of you, or like I'd say 50% of you, knew how to, off the top of your head, create a user account from the Windows command line. Because it's not something we do every day, right? It's okay to admit you don't know how to do these things, especially as we get older. So it tells us net user, username, password, add. Let's test it. I'm going to come over. I'm going to be framing Jeff today for this. So I'm going to do net user. Jeff, I'm going to give it a password that meets most complexity requirements and say add. And it says Good job, you created an account. How do I add that account to the admins group? How would I add? Remember, it's a chat bot, so you can speak in context like you're having a conversation. How would I add the created account to the local admins group? Now notice, I don't have to, did I have to say, you know, I'm still on the Windows command line? No, like it's got the context from the fact that I asked earlier how to do it on the Windows command line. So it's giving me the Windows command way to do it. So it says net local group administrators, whatever your user is that you created, add. So whatever name you created, if you picked your name, you can do that, but I'm just going to say net, follow what it says, local group, administrators, Jeff, add. Jeff's just hacking away here. Now he's made himself a local admin on that machine, right? And we can prove that, right? If we do net local group administrators, it'll list out the people that are part of that administrators group. And you can see Jeff is clearly in there. Now, what is the problem with that? Well, in the Windows event log, there's now an event that says that account named Jeff was created. And there's also an event that says that account was added to the local admins group. So there's evidence in the event logs. Now we'll do another version of this webinar where we completely look at it from a blue team side, right? So we'll look at how to, because right now we're going to cover our track. So let's do that. I'm going to do Control C or Command C if you have a MacBook, Control C or Command C, back off any extra C's that come up, hit Y for yes. That takes us back to Metepreter. All right, now watch closely. From the Metepreter window, I'm just going to type the command clear EV. And when we did that, it actually just wiped all the Windows event logs. Now, again, from a ChatGPT perspective, how would I know how to do that? Simple. I'm just going to ask from Metepreter, how would I clear Windows event logs? Look at what it tells us. And then it goes on to say, by the way, if you want to ensure that they're actually cleared, you can do WEVT util space EL. But there will be some evidence in there that the logs were cleared, right? We'll do that in the second half. But essentially, it would show us that like there's no evidence that the accounts are created, but there will be evidence that the logs were cleared, which as an investigator, that should be like a clear sign that you got problems. But like the point of this is like what I hope you got out of this and what I was trying to get you to understand is if you watch me do this webinar and all you have is the first 5 minutes of it, you can't go and duplicate what I did just from watching me do it, right? But if you have ChatGPT now, which you all do, you can absolutely watch what I did, write down what the key steps were, and prompt yourself to excellence and being able to get there and get through it yourself. So that is what it was all about. And I will stop the demo there, hopefully to interest you in coming back for another one of these at some point. Jeff's got some things to close us out.
Yeah, appreciate everyone coming to this webinar, this on-demand workshop. So just a reminder, yeah, we only had an hour today. So this is the type of material that you would learn in our 5-day ethical hacking bootcamp. So if anyone would like to, get that full 5-day experience, we are offering a special discount to everyone on the call for our February and March boot camps for the ethical hacking ones. You can see the dates right there on the screen. So during This 5-day boot camp, you'll go much more in depth into the techniques and live instruction, hands-on labs, and all the stuff that Keatron covered today. It also prepares you to pass your certified ethical hacker exam and earn your CEH. So everyone who's on this call today is eligible for 10% off those upcoming dates in February and March. And also anyone who enrolls will get extended access to Infosec Skills. You get a full year of access to that skills platform. That's the platform that you logged in to do the labs. Within that platform, there's additional courses, such as we have AI Security Essentials, ChatGPT for offensive security, as well as, thousands of other courses and labs in there. I'll kick it back to you. Keatron is one of our bootcamp instructors. He's taught ethical hacking before. Can you maybe provide a little more, just a 60 seconds or so on what people would expect if they were to sign up for one of these boot camps and how that works?
Yeah, so what we do in the new boot camp is you'll still learn all of the basic and advanced like hacking stuff that we normally teach, but it's heavily married to and paired to AI, right? So for example, just like I showed you how to use prompting for Nmap and Metasploit and covering tracks and those things, we get much, much deeper into that, and you learn how to use different types of models, because the thing that people don't realize about AI is large language models is just one type of model. There are other kinds of models that are not, there are other foundation models that are not language models, and they can help you accomplish different things. So in that course, we get into that a bit. We get into using some of those techniques to help you with things, especially like recon, cutting that down a lot because a big chunk of your time is spent doing that. Some of the things like fuzzing to find new vulnerabilities in software. Fuzzing takes a lot of compute and a lot of time. With AI, fuzzing cuts down exponentially the amount of time it takes you to do it. So that's the kind of things that you get into in that course. Even if you've got your CEH in the last year or so, I still think you'll find it valuable to marry that AI piece to it.
Awesome. Well, with that, we will go ahead and wrap up. Thanks everyone for joining us today. If you'd like more information, please reach out to us at any time. We're happy to answer all of your ethical hacking training questions or any questions you have about cybersecurity training for you or your team. Also, a reminder to play around in the lab environment. As Keatron mentioned, we put it on the free tier, so you should be able to play around with it for a while. Thank you all for joining us.